Tonight on True Crime Talk.
Some true crime stories capture headlines, while sadly others fade into the background. Maybe they're overshadowed by louder tragedies or just get lost in the constant noise of our 24-hour news cycle.
These days, we have instant access to every breaking story, even every rumor, and it's changed the way we consume crime stories.
Social media has the power to make a case go viral overnight, but it can also bury others just as quickly. With algorithms, streaming platforms, and yes, even podcasts, content is everywhere, and it's a double-edged sword.
Cold cases are getting more attention than ever, but at the same time, it's harder for any one case to truly take hold.
And behind every headline is a human story that deserves to be heard. That's part of what we try to do here at True Crime Talk, to give a voice to victims who are still waiting for justice.
So today, we are shining a light on cold cases, where those voices were silenced. We're talking about women whose lives were cut short, mothers, daughters, sisters, and friends.
To help us, we're talking to investigator and author Dr. Alice Clark about her upcoming book, The Forgotten Girls, where she shares stories of tragedy but also resilience.
She digs into not only the evidence, but the humanity of the women she covers, their dreams, their struggles, and the grief that lingers long after the crime scene tape is gone. Tonight on True Crime Talk, we are talking about The Forgotten Girls, the new book by Alice Clark, Ph.D. The Forgotten Girls is the haunting true crime stories of women and cold cases. And this gripping exploration delves into the lives of these women, revealing their dreams, struggles, and profound impact of their untimely deaths on their families and the communities. With meticulous research and heartfelt storytelling, Dr. Clark sheds light on the complexities of these cases, presenting not only the factual details, but also the emotional truths that lie beneath the surface. Thank you for joining us here tonight, Dr. Clark. I want to start off here by saying, I see in your bio that you're retired Norfolk police detective, and forgive me for saying so, but I mean this is a compliment. You look far too young to be retired, first of all. Second of all, when I was a kid reading true crime books, they were either penned by an author or a detective. And you could tell about 3 or 4 pages into a book, with the exception of Joseph Wambaugh, who was a detective and who was an author. That's not the case anymore these days. All of our officers, detectives, even the retired ones, are far more educated than in previous decades, where most of the time it was a young man or woman who would sign up to be a beat cop and work their way up to being a detective. But tell us more about your background, because there's a lot here.
Yeah, I was 17 years old, actually 16 years old. I was in high school and I got invited to a Police Explorer meeting. And I went, fell in love with it because I originally wanted to be a pediatrician. And that just laid the groundwork for my law enforcement career. And I wanted to be a cop so bad, I ended up at age 17 joining the Army, becoming a military police officer, and went to boot camp. Of course, my parents had to sign the paperwork, but I did graduate when I was 17 years old, and went to boot camp and did some adventures in the Army. And obviously I was in the reserves, National Guard, and they paid my way through college. You know, that can't beat that tuition. And I went to the police academy in 2004, but in 2003 I went to Iraq and came home, had to have knee surgery. I think that was July, and joined the police department in September. Went through the academy, and that just started my career. And I did 22 years in the Army National Guard, and 20 years, almost 20 years on the police department. And most of my career on the police department was in the detective division. I did 7 in patrol, doing various things like ATV beach patrol, bike patrol. I was also a field training instructor. I just enjoyed what I do. I love training. And I went to the bureau. I went to forensics. And then 4 years later, I went to burglary. And then after that, I went to robbery and homicide. And I just enjoyed what I did. And I eventually, unfortunately, started going through some like panic attacks and stuff. And it was all from Iraq stuff from back in 2003. Because I was at Abu Ghraib prison where all the mortars and everything happened. So I would end up going into my captain's office because he had a rug on the floor, laid on the floor, put my legs up a little bit to get some of the blood to come back to my face. And I started realizing, I needed to get some sort of help. And I decided to retire, and that's when I retired. And I applied for this university position, and within a week I was hired, and I was still in Virginia, and the university is in South Florida. So that was pretty amazing. And I just, I think I'm where I need to be. And doing my PhD and learning how to write was a big coping strategy for me. And getting to understand how to express myself and writing these stories actually helped me a lot mentally.
You were a detective with the Norfolk, Virginia Police Department?
Yep.
With your book here, so it dives into a lot of different cases, all involving females who are either missing and presumed murdered or murdered. And with your book, did you tackle any cases that you worked directly or that your agency had involvement with?
Yes. One of my friends that was actually in the academy with me, John Smith, he was the lead detective in the Dennis Bowman case, and he was the suspect for Andrea Bowman, which was his adopted daughter, and the Kathleen Doyle case from September 11th, 1980 in Norfolk, Virginia. And it was quite interesting that he ended up working that case because I was listening in on his interview, and he was just so humble to Dennis Bowman that Dennis Bowman just started confessing. I don't know. It was just the way he talked to him and stuff. And you don't see detectives that are always like that. And it gets interesting when people are in the interview room, because obviously everyone's scared and they don't know what to do. But when you remain humble and respectful to some of these suspects, they end up talking to you, because a lot of times they don't have anybody that ever cares about how they feel. And Dennis Bowman was one of those guys. He was a Navy guy, and apparently back in the day, he decided to get drunk and then go into a house, and next thing you know, Kathleen's murdered, and then the case went cold for a long time. But this was a multi-jurisdictional case because obviously he lived in a different state. NAS, Naval Air Station, he was actually here in Virginia for 2 weeks for his reserve duties, which was interesting.
Kathleen Doyle, this sounds so familiar. I don't know if there's a documentary on this one.
This was the Into the Fire, The Lost Daughter. So this is a really complicated case. So you have she gives up her daughter for adoption, and this family, husband and wife, Dennis Bowman and his wife, adopt this young girl who was Alexis Badger. And then she becomes Andrea Bowman. And they lived up in Michigan.
Yes.
And her case was treated as a runaway case. And I believe she accused Dennis, her adopted father, of molesting her, maybe on multiple accounts. And she disappears. It's treated as this runaway case, but then he is arrested for this other murder that takes place in 1980, the Kathleen Doyle case in Norfolk, Virginia. And if I remember correctly, it's been a while since I've seen this documentary. I think it came out last year, but I watched it right when it came out. And the biological mother just has this feeling, this sense inside of her that it's that she knows where her daughter is buried, and that this man is responsible. And it turns out this guy had no business adopting any children. He should not be around any children. He shouldn't be around people, right?
Yes.
This guy is a monster that managed to keep it a big secret, how evil he was for a very long time.
And he blames the monster too.
Yeah.
The monster in him. I mean, it's very interesting with Dennis Bowman because there's stories where he's been looked at for other things as well. Possible abduction, chasing a girl on a bike, and to come to find out, this was two people. And like my question was there more? Because if you look at and read the book or look at the documentaries, and for the record, I wrote all this stuff before the documentary came out. This was actually one of the first chapters I wrote. But it was just interesting just learning about it. And then talking to Detective John Smith, my friend that was in charge of this case, just listening to him. And at the end in chapter 3, I do a little bonus with question and answers with John. And he answers it. And it's just amazing. It just happened to be a cold case conference in Norfolk, and Michigan police were there, So that's just kind of like, hey, you talking about this guy? I think he's like involved in this. So they started collaborating, and then come to find out, they got their answers.
And is this the one where the biological mom really advocated for her and ended up putting up a billboard in front of his house?
Yes.
That's what I remember about this documentary. So she played an instrumental part too in saying, this is the guy.
Well, yeah, she had her thoughts, but with evidence, you have to have enough evidence to do a warrant. And unfortunately, there wasn't any. And I don't want to give too much away about this book, but I'll just say that, when they ended up moving, Andrea ended up moving as well.
When you were listening to the other detective talk with Dennis Bowman, I'm getting the vibe that he was somewhat remorseful?
I wouldn't say he was completely remorseful, but he was evading certain questions, like the questions to the sexual assault stuff. He did not want to admit to any of that. But she was brutally murdered. Talking about Kathleen Doyle, and to me, and he used the excuse that he was drunk and didn't remember anything. But if you're going to unscrew the mouthpiece in the phone, that to me has some sort of motive. I think he was in his right mind. I know he was in his right mind. I don't think, because he was using alcohol as an excuse, but he kept evading the rape questions and such.
Was Kathleen an adult?
Yes, she was married to a naval officer.
And how did that crime come about? I mean, did the two know each other, or?
No. So he was, from what he said, he was drunk walking home. He needed some money, so he broke into this house. And then he was looking for, stuff like money and stuff because he didn't have any. And he ended up, I guess, in her bedroom, and they both got startled. She screamed, and then he said that she stabbed her with like a little pocket knife or whatever. But there's more to the story, and I don't want to give out too much, but she ended up brutally murdered and raped and tied up.
They didn't connect this with his adopted daughter.
No, not yet. Not until the cold case detective, which is Detective John Smith, he ended up going to that cold case conference, and then the Michigan, and then they just started talking and say, "Hey, I think we're looking at the same guy for two different cases," So, but what happened with Kathleen Doyle? Her friend Vivian was over the night before, and they had some wine or whatever, and then the next day because Kathleen's husband was out on deployment in the Indian River, and Vivian, I guess, was calling to check on her. She never answered the phone, so her and her husband went over to check on them, and then when they went inside, they found Kathleen in her bedroom on the floor.
And he ultimately confessed to that murder and then pled guilty.
Yes, he acted like he was scared too, and that's why he stabbed her, but he kept evading like the sexual connotations, and like she was tied up, and like I said about the mouthpiece missing, and it was just a whole bunch of stuff that he kept evading. Like it was like, oh, it was an accident, you know what I mean? But that wasn't the case.
And he probably didn't break into the house looking for money.
Probably not. Yeah.
I mean, one of my an FBI agent that I talked to years ago had told me that when you are looking at a serial rapist, oftentimes you will find that they have a lot of burglary charges. And that's because they broke into a home, but they were never charged with the sexual assault because they didn't get to that part yet. So he would often find that they would have a lengthy history of breaking into homes. With the book here, it's broken up into 3 different parts. We have part 1 is murdered and unsolved cases. Part 2 is presumed murder. These are still missing
women. Yep.
And then the third part is cold cases with some solutions here. With the first part, what would you say is one of the more haunting cases that maybe the listeners are not so familiar with?
I think chapter 2, talking about Caitlin case. She was buying a vehicle in Texas and ends up missing, and they find her body later naked in a field. And I believe the police didn't do either a good job or they're working for somebody. It's very weird. And the sex trafficking and like the interviews, like the dad, he's like doing his own investigation, and I feel for him. And they had a website and everything up, which they've taken down because they found the body. And originally her case that I was writing about was in the part 2 where they were missing. And then as I'm writing the book, eventually her body was found. So I ended up moving her chapter into part 1. Chapter 2, I call it Big Mess in Texas. And, there's just a lot going on there. And some of the things that happen, like her dad talks about how he was talking to her on the phone and she didn't seem like herself, but he could hear there was a gravel road. And next thing you know, like the phone goes silent. And then eventually when they find her car, it looks like someone tried to take her car and push it over a cliff, but it got stuck in a tree. And her phone and all her clothing was in the car, which was not like Caitlin. And there was no fingerprints or anything on there. And like when you get people involved, like cartels and stuff like that, they know how to wipe clean things. A year later is when her body was found, a little further down. And to me, that's kind of interesting because like the police were saying that like a bunch of wild hogs or dogs could have eaten her and stuff, but I don't think that was the case. I think there was something going on in that police department or in that town area. She was actually found on private property, and one of the witnesses in this case says that she saw 2 vehicles go in and only one left. And then next thing you know, her story is kind of like recanted. I guess I don't know if her husband, told her or somebody else told her to like stop talking or whatever to the police. But it's just interesting enough because I think there's more answers that need to be, or more questions that need to be answered in this case. But it's disturbing to me because I feel like there's some sort of mishap with the police.
How did this one come to your attention?
Funny enough, Nancy Grace.
Really?
Yes. I have an hour drive to and from work every day. And then obviously an hour drive, you have a lot to think about. So I started listening to podcasts and, being a forensic investigator, being a forensic professor, some of these cases, I like to listen to because it does talk about the new technology and how different states are handling things. So I like to listen to them, as a knowledgeable thing and, learning. And I just happened to listen to her case and her dad was talking, which really sucked me in. And, talking about his daughter, Caitlin. And it's just, he was very upset.
Then how do you approach it after that point? Once you're aware of it and want to really dive into it, are you looking through news articles? Are you able to access records for these cases? How do you go about it?
So I reached out and asked, Peggy, if she would like to do an interview or anything, but she didn't respond. So I was like, okay, I'm just going to dive into this. So I started listening to a lot of different podcasts that had to do with Caitlin Rose case. And, I started looking at all the news articles and stuff like that. Then I started like writing things down and kind of putting like my forensic twist on there to look. And like I asked questions inside the book that, I think need to be answered. Obviously, I can't answer them because nobody's talking. And I don't think the police department wants to talk because they know either what happened or the poor work that they did.
Was this a police department or was it sheriff's office?
It was the police department and the investigative bureau in Texas.
And they never handed the case over to anybody else, or?
No, and I think they just left it as either undetermined or they solved because they said there's no way to determine like if she was murdered. But nobody really wanted to talk to me on this case, which I found, kind of interesting.
Yeah, my experience has been it's a bit of a mixed bag. Most of the time they do want to talk, but I've also encountered several cases where they don't want to. The law enforcement agency doesn't want to talk at all. It's really difficult to kind of put your finger on why that is, and it's easy to hide behind the this is an open investigation.
Yes.
Yeah, that's the sentence that I hate to hear the most, especially when sometimes I'm reaching out about cases that are 20, 25 years old. It's,
yes.
What I mean, come on, it's an open investigation. I get that. That's not a lie. Is it an active investigation? Is what I want to know.
Right.
With the part 2, it's presumed murdered. So we have a lot of women here that are simply missing. Some that have been missing for a very long time, long enough to the point where it's presumed that they've been killed. With the still missing, is there one in there that you get the feeling that we could be finding the victim, we could be finding some answers, and maybe potentially soon?
Yeah, there's one or two that really come to mind. First one is the Jodi Huisentruit case. She was the missing news anchor. I think people are still talking about it today. And there's a Facebook page called Find Jodi, Jodi. And I think they're coming close to that case. And they're still getting leads. She was late for work as a news anchor. And she and her boss or co-anchor talked on the phone, and she's like, okay, I'm on the way. So she ended up like with her bag. She had her hair dryer, her red high heels in her bag. And what was interesting is she had her car key and in the door to unlock it, and it happened to be bent. So to me, that means there was a struggle of some sort of abduction. And if you're looking at, the news anchor stuff, I think she had a stalker. And that person ended up knowing her schedule and just waited for her. And all her stuff like hair dryer and everything was in the parking lot next to her car. The other one is the chapter's called Putting Out Fires. It's about Brandy Hall in Florida. And she was a missing firefighter. Long story short, there was a drug case with her husband, who happened to be the chief, involved. And he ended up arrested. But she ended up missing the day of his court appearance. And there was some sort of like menage a trois stuff going on in that case. And this is quite interesting because when they did find her vehicle, it was submerged in a pond with a lot of blood, enough blood to notate that the person's probably dead. But her body is still missing to this day.
And you think that they may find it, that they're onto something with this one?
There's an individual that she was, I guess, had an affair with. He's not really cooperating with police, but there's also not enough probable cause to get a warrant. But I think her body is probably buried on where her skid steer was. That's what I think.
Tell us about one of the cases in your book that needs more of a news presence, that needs more telling of the story to keep the story alive.
There's a few. The disappearing cyclist was a young girl that she was riding her bike and then just disappears. It's, still under investigation. And once again, I tried to get information and nobody wants to talk about it. Her name was Tara Calico. She was from New Mexico, riding her mother's bike on the side of the road. She ended up with a flat tire. And next thing you know, she disappears and the bike was still there. and nobody's heard of her since.
And the investigating agency didn't want to talk with you on that one?
No, I send emails out just because it has my signature information in it to know that I'm, who I am. Because a lot of times when you make phone calls, people like you don't know who they are on the other side of the phone. They're not going to give you information.
Oh, yeah.
So I send my email information with has all my information on there to show who I am, and is like crickets. And then sometimes when I reach out to some family members, I don't know if it's going to the right email address, but what I've been doing is looking on Facebook, because some of the people on Facebook have those find so and so for a Facebook page. But the last sighting from her was at like 11:45 in the morning. It was about 2 miles from her home, and her bike was just on the side of the road, and then the tire was just still spinning.
And there was something in her case about a photo, a Polaroid photo.
Yeah, that ended up not being her. It was with another little boy, and they were like duct taped and stuff. It's quite interesting.
But that photo was found on the other side of the country.
Yeah.
That photo was found in Florida, I believe, in a parking lot.
Crazy.
And they know it wasn't her. They've kind of ruled that out.
Yeah. It kind of reminds me about that television show or Netflix series, that Amy case where she went to
Bradley.
Yes. For some reason, this case reminds me of this one.
The photo.
Interesting.
So let me ask you, and speaking of that case too, with all the missing women that you've looked at, do you ever think it's possibly the case that they voluntarily are missing, that they walked away? That seems to be a rumor in a lot of different cases, but have you come across any where you find that's potentially the case?
There's obviously cases that happen like that. I remember being on patrol one day. I ended up coming across a young lady who had just turned 18, and she was a missing runaway. And I was like, hey, I have to take you into custody, and because you're missing. And she's like, well, I'm 18 now. I was like, I understand that, but I have to take you to get you out of the system, because she was in the system for 3 years as being a missing runaway, which she voluntarily ran away. But now she's an adult. I had to take her out of the system. I didn't handcuff her or anything, but it's still procedure. So that to me lets me know that there's still cases out there where that's the case. What's interesting in my mind is Americans, they don't want their DNA taken, without a warrant. As in the UK, in the early 2000s, they created a law when you're born, they do your DNA. So if that's the case, I feel like if we do a DNA data bank for deceased persons, we would find a lot of these missing individuals because of that, or find suspects, that have been deceased. Because in the Debbie Randall case, her killer killed himself 2 years after he killed her, but this case went unsolved for many years. So I think that DNA database would help solve a lot of that, in my opinion.
Absolutely. I think that would be a big step in the right direction to clearing a lot of these cases. I think last time I checked the stats on it, we're talking 250,000 cold cases in the United States. With the Tara Calico case, of course, we have that photograph, which is bizarre, which could just be a manufactured picture, right? An image that doesn't, it's not of two abducted children. It could be a staged photo for whatever reason. Somebody would do something like that. I don't know. But with her case, I feel like the rumors, I'm always very intrigued by what is the local rumor about what happened very early on into an investigation. Because I've found that there's usually some form of truth, some degree of truth in that rumor when we end up solving the case 30, 40 years later. And with the Calico case, I seem to recall that there was some suspicion or local rumor that it may have simply been that somebody accidentally hit her with their vehicle and decided to take the body with them.
Right. But the scene was never processed correctly, and evidence wasn't found until the next day. Her mom found a cassette tape the next day, which
And
was
the bike,
interesting.
but the bike was recovered
Yeah.
with the flat tire.
Uh, I mean, it's interesting, because back to Dennis Bowman, he followed the girl on the bike, and if, she could have crashed, and then he could have taken her and did what, God forbid, anything. But she managed to escape. But if you look at Tara, maybe she wasn't so lucky. And
Yeah.
back in those times, we didn't really think about sex trafficking or just trafficking in general. That's a big thing nowadays, but we didn't think about that stuff back then. And it's just more in the early or the late 2000s when people started becoming more aware of trafficking in general.
And Tara was only 19, I believe, when she disappeared.
Because I'm looking at her story too, and just it baffles me that the police didn't secure the scene properly. Like a lot of these things weren't found until the next day. But like that Polaroid picture was found in that parking lot, and I believe it was Port St. Joe, Florida, and that was in 1989. And Polaroids were still a big thing back then. And there was supposed witnesses that had reported like a white Toyota, I think it was like a cargo van, lingering near that location where the photo was found. And that was just interesting. Like, I don't know, some people want to do things like that to get people going, or even to bring the case back to life. People are weird in certain situations when it comes to that, leaving little breadcrumbs.
It's crazy because the girl in the photo doesn't look unlike Tara Calico. I mean, there's certainly some similarities there. One thing I found fascinating about that photograph is there's identifiers in that photograph, and it appears that they are inside of a white van, and the identifiers would be the t-shirts that the girl is wearing and that the boy is wearing. To me, I feel like the image of the girl in the picture looks to be too young to be Tara. But yeah, there's and I can't remember what the markers are on those shirts, but there's some indicator of where those shirts may have been from. And then I remember that photograph made its way around all of the news outlets and the magazine shows back in the day. You're right, it was a Toyota cargo van, white windowless Toyota cargo van. And the photograph was found in 1989. She went missing in 1988 in September. And there's always been two rumors that I found fascinating in the Calico case. One, that there was a pickup truck with a camper shell that may have been seen following her. And then the other rumor was that this was a group of young men, Tara's age, that knew her, and that they had abducted her, and there's a cone of silence around this group of young men.
And you know what is also interesting too? Like, a mother would know her child, you know what I'm saying? So when the mother, Patty, she saw the Polaroid, she had a doubt, that it was her. But if you have an investigator that keeps pushing because they want to solve this case and say, hey, this looks really like her, and then try and change the mom's point of view of the picture, then that could possibly happen. But her mom had, a lot of doubt that wasn't her. I think, if you're a mother, you're going to know your child, the way, the gait of the child, how the child walks, looks, the eyes and all that kind of stuff. You're going to know that kind of stuff.
The eyes are so clear in this picture. I agree. The mother would know.
Yes.
And there's a book in this picture. I can't tell what the title of this book is, but it looks like it's placed in this photo. So
everything is placed.
The cover. Yeah. But no one in all this time has ever come forward and saying, oh, that was us in the picture.
No.
It was I don't know, a joke, or they're making a movie or something. It never has been disproven to be real.
I think they found the boy.
Oh, they did?
I think so, yes. But that was a whole different... I think they found the boy, but I think the boy was deceased. I didn't look too much into it because I was mainly concerned of her because of the women aspect of the book. Um, but I think they found the boy.
Interesting. I'll have to look that
Yeah.
up.
Michael Henley.
Oh, okay. And what
Well,
was his story? Was he abducted and this was him in the photo?
I don't know if it
yeah,
was
so
him.
he
Go ahead.
he disappeared, but I think it's his family that says it's him.
Mm-hmm.
And then Tara Calico, as we said, her mother says no, it's not her. It so my experience has been on a very limited sample size here, but on a couple cases I've seen mothers so desperate for answers that they are clearly wrong, and they're like, yes, that's my kid, yes, that's my daughter, that's my son. And in fact, there was a case here in Ohio where a woman was picked up, and she claimed to be, this is a grown woman, 20 years old, claimed to be this missing college student who had just gone missing a month or two prior. And when the family shows up to the police station, the mom is like, oh my God, that's absolutely my daughter. And the husband, the father, and the son, the brother, are like, that's not her at all. Like, and they ended up, and it was such a weird case because this was in the late 70s. What they ended up doing was, this woman's alive, right? The woman that's in she got picked up and she's getting locked up for something, and she's claiming to be this missing young woman, and they end up doing dental records comparing the dental records of the missing young woman to the woman that they have in custody, and they're like, yeah, this is not your daughter. She's likely only claiming to be this missing young woman because we're taking charges to her. She's going to be locked up.
And the mother's hoping so much that
the mother swore up and down.
She tells herself it is. Yeah.
Yeah. That's what I was saying, that they thought the boy in the picture was Michael Henley, but I don't think it ever really was. And then, what is it? She was finally declared deceased in 1998, I want to say, from a judge, Tara. So obviously they left it as a homicide.
What I'm seeing now, Michael Henley was 9 years old, disappeared in New Mexico around the same time as Tara, and his mother said that could potentially be him, but it seems like he wandered off and maybe died from exposure.
Yeah.
And was not abducted at all.
And like Nick was saying, mothers or whoever and family members can be so desperate to find somebody, which leads me to believe that wasn't Tara, because the mom said, she had that doubt that it was even her.
And you're right. They did find the boy. From my understanding, he died like in the woods or in the wilderness somewhere. And then with the third part, there are some cases that have been resolved. Is that correct?
Yes. And one of them obviously is the Dennis Bowman case, but the other one is Debbie Lynn Randall. She was like 12 years old. She was at the laundromat, goes to walk home, gets abducted, and later on they found her body in like a ditch area. And it's just, this is where I was talking about how if we had a deceased data bank where the suspect ended up killing himself 2 years later, and then they literally did genealogy in this case, which is exciting for me. And they ended up linking to the suspect's daughter, and they ended up ultimately exhuming the suspect's body. And, that's how they were able to actually close the case. But this girl, Debbie Lynn Randall, kind of reminds me of myself, because I had like red hair and freckles as a kid, and like looking at her picture, it just, like that could have been me,
She was just walking near her house.
Mm-hmm. And her, the dad was there with her doing laundry at the laundromat, and she was playing with her little dolls and stuff. And he was like, all right, come home. Well, she went home and obviously didn't make it. It's a really sad thing. And then what stuck with me in this case is the medical examiner. She was strangled, But ultimately, the medical examiner said that if she wasn't strangled, she would have bled to death vaginally. Yeah, and that's how they ended up getting the DNA to solve this case. Was rag was like stuffed in her vaginal area to stop the bleeding.
It makes you wonder what else this guy, William Rose, what else he
Mhm.
may have done in those
Yeah.
2 years.
And I mean, apparently, thinking about it, it probably stuck with him. And that's why he probably ultimately ended up killing himself. Just an innocent little girl taken. And then, like, I think there was like laundry soap left in the road as well. But it's just so sad, just thinking about this little innocent girl and then ultimately getting found in the woods. It's one of the
And
cases that really
terrifying.
upset me. Yeah, it's just
These are one of the scary nightmare cases of just a crime of opportunity, wrong place, wrong time.
Wrong. Yep.
Nightmare.
Yep. And then like you look at parents today, some of them are helicopter parents because of all this. And then some of them, I've had, dead bodies in the street and the parents come out with their kid and show them. I'm like, what is wrong with you? But it's just really sad. Yeah.
This one's weird, Carolyn, because it shares some similarities with the case that fascinated us for many years, the Brad Bellino case, because Brad was killed, 1972? And was solved in 2023?
Yeah.
And same thing with the Debbie Lynn Randall case. She went missing January 13, 1972. And it looks like for more than 50 years, the mystery of who killed a young Marietta girl has haunted investigators and troubled the community. And it looks like it was solved in 2023, if I have that correct.
And this is what I'm saying. If we had a DNA database for deceased individuals, this might have been solved a long time ago.
And then you wonder, too, was this the first crime? Was this his first crime? What else could be solved with his DNA?
Correct. I don't know. I don't understand why we don't have a DNA database for deceased individuals. I don't understand. But that would, I think, save a lot of money with genealogy. It would save a lot of money in the long run of all these investigations. Because think about how long this investigation was. It could have been ended in 2 years, at the minimum. Whereas, you're talking about years later, many years later, all the investigation time put into that, because you're talking about like police officer salary. A lot of them, let's say, for example, they're making like $30 an hour, so that, and then you have overtime on top of that. So I don't know. I think this DNA database would save a lot of money.
And then her parents would have had answers. It looks like, sadly, they passed away before ever getting this answer.
Well, they lived long enough that they would have been around for the DNA. Her mother passes away in 2018 and the father passes away in 2022. As Alice is saying, this is something that would probably could have had the answer to in the mid to late 90s.
Yeah, and then they would have died with closure, knowing. And the family plots could have all been together. They would have been able to have a burial, which is closure for people, funerals.
Might have extended their lives too.
I
really believe in a lot of these cases, it takes years off of the parents and the loved ones' lives.
Stress. Yeah, the stress is real, I'll tell you. There's been so many times where I've gone to do like a death notification, and I feel like sometimes that ages them right then, like the look on their face, the crying, and it's really sad for these families.
Yeah, I'm sure in many ways their life ends that day too.
Yeah, a lot of times.
Well, and we want to thank you for your service, both with your time in the military and your time in law enforcement. And thank you for this book as well, The Forgotten Girls, because this is keeping a lot of these stories that are of missing women and the unsolved cold cases. It's keeping these stories very much alive. And that's what we need to do. Because if we don't keep talking about them, they fade away and they go away. And we need people working these cases. I love your idea for the DNA database of the deceased. But yeah, I'm interested in diving into some more of these cases.
What I always say is I'm just a retired detective with a PhD. and that could be dangerous.
Absolutely brilliant stuff from the good doctor. She is Alice Clark. The book is The Forgotten Girls, haunting true crime stories of women and their cold cases, available everywhere now in print, ebook, and audiobook. And if you want more great true crime, go to wildbluepress.com and check out all of the amazing true crime books that they have there, just sitting there waiting for you. There's so much to choose from. We have recent releases like John Hinckley Jr., Who I Really Am, Empire City Under Siege by Craig McGuire, Every Killer Leaves a Trace by Dennis Carson, and The Las Vegas Massacre Connections by Mark Gray. That's wildbluepress.com for everything that is great in true crime. Thank you for tuning in once again to True Crime Talk. Join us back here next week.